I thought disappearing would be enough, but I didn't realize he had already memorized every way I could run. By the time I saw him standing across the train station, calm like he had nowhere else to be, I understood something had gone terribly wrong. The crowd moved around me in slow waves, people dragging suitcases, checking their phones, living ordinary lives that suddenly felt impossibly far away from mine. My pulse was too loud in my ears, too fast, like it was trying to warn me before my mind could catch up. 6 hours earlier, I had been certain I was in control. I left my apartment at exactly 2:13 a.m., no luggage, just a small backpack with cash and a burner phone I had never activated until that moment. I changed routes 3 times, switched cars twice, paid everything in cash, avoided every camera I could spot. I followed rules I had memorized like survival instincts, rules designed to make a person vanish in a city that never stopped watching. I didn't look back, not once, because looking back meant hesitation, and hesitation left patterns. I told myself I was invisible. I told myself he wouldn't notice. But somewhere between the second taxi and the corner store where I bought a bottle of water I didn't even drink, something shifted. A camera above the door blinked out just as I stepped inside. The cashier didn't meet my eyes, just handed me my change like he'd been told exactly what to do. I felt it then, not fear, not yet, but something colder. Awareness, like stepping onto a stage and realizing the lights were already on. And now, standing there with the sound of a departing train echoing through the station, I finally understood the truth I had been too desperate to see. I hadn't escaped anything. I had followed a path that was already waiting for me. I should have moved the second I saw him, but my body refused, locked in place like something inside me already knew there was no point. Adrian Volkov did not chase people. He did not need to. And standing there in the middle of a crowded station, he looked exactly the same as the last time I saw him, composed, deliberate, untouched by the noise around him, as if the world adjusted itself to his presence instead of the other way around. He did not signal, did not call my name, did not even step closer, and somehow that made it worse, because it meant he was certain I would come to him or that I would not make it past this moment either way. My grip tightened around the strap of my backpack, fingers going numb as I forced myself to breathe slowly, to think, because panic created mistakes and mistakes created patterns, and patterns were the only thing I had tried to erase. I turned away first, not toward him but toward the departure board, forcing my eyes to focus on something ordinary, something predictable, rows of destinations and times that followed rules I understood, rules that made sense, unlike him. Track 12, 5 minutes. I started walking, steady pace, not too fast, not too slow, blending into the flow of commuters heading toward the same platform, telling myself that distance still meant something, that space could still protect me if I used it correctly. My mind raced through options, exits, angles, reflections in glass panels, anything that could tell me if he was moving, if he was following, but every instinct I had sharpened over the past 6 hours began to dull under a heavier realization that settled into my chest like cold air. He had already been here when I arrived. That meant he knew the train I would choose before I chose it. That meant this was not a coincidence. I reached the escalator and stepped on without hesitation, keeping my posture neutral, my gaze forward, counting each second in silence like it could anchor me to something real. 1, 2, 3. Halfway up, I caught his reflection in the brushed metal panel to my right. He was not rushing. He was not weaving through the crowd. He simply walked in a straight line, and people moved out of his way without realizing why. My throat tightened. I stepped off the escalator and turned left instead of right, changing direction at the last second, testing the pattern, breaking it, forcing a variable into the equation. A convenience store sat near the corner, bright lights, glass windows, a place with witnesses, with noise, with the illusion of safety. I pushed the door open and stepped inside, the bell above it chiming softly, too soft, like even that sound had been lowered. The air smelled like coffee and paper and something stale, familiar in a way that should have grounded me, but did not. I grabbed a bottle of water from the cooler and walked to the counter, placing it down with steady hands that did not match the storm inside me. The cashier scanned it without looking up. No greeting, no eye contact, no acknowledgement beyond the mechanical movement of his hands. I placed a $20 bill on the counter. He did not reach for it immediately. For a split second, everything slowed again. And then he slid the change back to me already counted, already exact, like the transaction had been decided before I walked in. My chest tightened further. I took the change, turned, and stepped back outside into the noise of the station, but it no longer sounded the same. It sounded distant, filtered, like I was standing behind glass watching a life that did not belong to me anymore. I did not need to look to know he was closer now. I felt it in the way the air shifted, in the way my instincts, the same ones that kept me safe all these years, stopped giving me answers. I started walking again, faster this time, toward the platform, toward the train that was supposed to leave in less than 3 minutes, because movement was the only thing I had left. The doors were open when I reached it, people boarding, voices overlapping, footsteps echoing against the metal floor, and for one brief, desperate moment, I believed I could still make it, that I could step inside, sit down, disappear into another city where his reach might not extend. I placed one foot onto the train. That was when his voice reached me, calm, low, unmistakable, close enough that I felt it before I fully heard it. You changed direction at the escalator. I froze. That was new. I turned slowly, because not turning was no longer an option, and he was there, just a few feet away, close enough that the space between us felt intentional, measured. His eyes held mine, steady, unreadable, like he was not searching for anything because he already knew the answer. You are learning, he said quietly, almost like it pleased him, and something inside me twisted at the implication. But not fast enough. The train doors began to close behind me, a soft chime echoing through the platform, and I realized I had not stepped fully inside. I had stopped exactly where he expected me to stop. I stepped back onto the platform without thinking, without deciding, like my body had made the choice for me, and the doors sealed shut, the train pulling away with a rush of wind that brushed past us and disappeared into the tunnel. Silence settled in its place, heavy and undeniable. I looked at him, really looked this time, at the calm certainty in his posture, at the absence of urgency, at the quiet control that did not need to prove itself. You knew, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. It was not a question. It never had been. His expression did not change, but something in his gaze sharpened just slightly, enough for me to feel it. I knew you would try, he replied. Not where, not when, just that I would. And somehow, that was worse. The space between us did not feel like distance anymore. It felt like something defined, measured, owned, and I hated that my first instinct was not to run, but to understand how he had done it, because understanding meant there was still a way out, and I needed to believe that. You are not guessing, I said, forcing the words past the tightness in my chest. You are predicting. His gaze did not leave mine, steady, patient, like time moved differently for him. There is a difference, he replied, his voice calm enough to almost disappear under the distant hum of the station. Prediction requires uncertainty. A small pause, deliberate. You remove your own. Something cold slid through me at that, sharp and precise, because I knew exactly what he meant even if I did not want to admit it. Every choice I had made tonight had followed logic, patterns, rules I believed made me unpredictable, but rules were still patterns, and patterns could be mapped. I swallowed, forcing myself to think instead of react. Then I will stop following rules, I said, more to myself than to him, but he heard it anyway. Of course he did. A faint shift in his expression, not quite a smile, not quite approval, something quieter, more dangerous. You will try, he said, not dismissive. Certain. That certainty pressed against me harder than any threat could have. I took a step back, then another, breaking the invisible line between us, refusing to stand where he expected me to stand. My heart was still racing, but my thoughts were sharpening again, cutting through the panic, searching for something he could not control, something he could not anticipate. Why? The word left me before I could stop it. Not why he found me. Not why he stopped me. Why me? It hung there between us, fragile and heavier than anything else I had said. For the first time, he did not answer immediately. The silence stretched just long enough to make me notice it, to make me feel it. His gaze shifted, not away, but deeper, like he was measuring how much truth I could handle. Because you think you can leave, he said finally, and there was something quieter under the words, something almost reflective. Most people do not try. That was not an answer. Or maybe it was, just not the kind I wanted. I shook my head, a short, Sharp motion. That is not a reason. It is enough, he said, and the finality in his tone made it clear he believed that completely. My jaw tightened. I turned again, this time without hesitation, and started walking away, not toward any specific destination, just away from him, away from that calm certainty that made everything feel smaller. One step, then another, then faster, pushing through the crowd without caring if I blended in or not, because blending in had not saved me. I needed something else now, something unpredictable. I cut across the platform, ignored the signs, took a staircase down instead of the main exit, the concrete walls closing in around me as the noise of the station faded into something distant and hollow. My footsteps echoed too loudly, too sharp, and I forced myself to slow down, to control the rhythm, because panic still created patterns, and I refused to give him that again. At the bottom of the stairs, the corridor split into two directions. No signs. No clear path. Good. I chose left. Without thinking, letting instinct take over instead of logic, letting randomness guide me for the first time tonight. The hallway stretched longer than I expected, fluorescent lights flickering faintly overhead, the air cooler, emptier, removed from the constant movement above. For a moment, just a moment, I felt it. Space. Distance. The illusion of control returning. I kept walking, counting my steps again without meaning to, then stopping the count halfway through, breaking it, breaking everything I had relied on before. 10 minutes passed, or maybe less. Time felt different down here, stretched and uncertain. I reached a metal door at the end of the corridor, pushed it open, and stepped out into a side street I did not recognize. The city air hit me, cool and sharp, carrying the distant sound of traffic and something familiar enough to feel grounding again. I stepped onto the sidewalk, turning right, then left, choosing directions at random, refusing to think too far ahead, refusing to create another path that could be followed. For the first time since I saw him, my breathing started to slow. Not steady, but slower. I glanced back once. The street behind me was empty. No sign of him. No movement that felt out of place. Just cars passing, headlights cutting through the early morning darkness, people moving in the distance who had nothing to do with me. A fragile sense of relief settled in, thin and cautious, like something that could break if I looked at it too closely. Maybe this was it. Maybe unpredictability was enough. Maybe I had finally stepped outside whatever system he had built around me. I turned forward again, focusing on the next corner, the next turn, the next moment, refusing to think beyond that. That was when my phone vibrated in my pocket. I froze. Slowly, carefully, I pulled it out, my fingers colder than they should have been. The screen lit up with a message from a number I did not recognize. No name. No history. Just one line. Left at the corridor. Right on the street. You are adapting. My breath caught, sharp and silent. Another message appeared before I could move. But you still look back. I turned instinctively, heart slamming. Against my ribs, scanning the street again, searching for him, for anything that would explain how he was still there, how he was still ahead of me even now. There was nothing. No figure. No shadow. No sign. Just the empty stretch of road and the distant glow of the city waking up. My grip tightened around the phone, the realization settling in fully this time, undeniable and complete. It did not matter where I went. It did not matter how I chose. He was not following me. He was inside the choices themselves. I stared at the screen like it might change if I waited long enough, like the words would rearrange themselves into something that made sense, but they did not move, did not flicker, did not give me anything except the quiet certainty that he was still there, still ahead, still watching in a way that did not require distance or proximity anymore. My thumb hovered over the phone, not knowing whether to turn it off or hold on to it, because turning it off felt like surrender, and keeping it felt like staying connected to something I could not control. I slipped it back into my pocket anyway, more out of instinct than decision, and forced my legs to move again, because standing still was worse. Standing still meant accepting that this was already over. The street stretched out in both directions. Early morning light beginning to soften the edges of the buildings. The city waking up in slow, ordinary ways that felt almost unreal compared to what was happening inside my head. A car passed, tires whispering against the pavement, and for a moment I focused on that sound. Something simple, something that followed rules I understood. I needed something that did not belong to him. I turned left at the next corner without thinking, then crossed the street halfway through the block, ignoring the signals, ignoring the patterns I had followed before, choosing randomness, choosing inconsistency, choosing anything that felt like mine. My breathing steadied a little with each step, not calm, never calm, but controlled enough to think again. If he was inside the choices, then I needed to step outside the system entirely. Not react, not follow, not choose based on fear or logic. Something else. Something he could not anticipate. I slowed down, then stopped completely in the middle of the sidewalk, people moving around me with brief glances of annoyance, and I closed my eyes for just a second, shutting out the noise, the movement, everything except the single question that mattered. What would I do if he did not exist? The answer came quieter than I expected. I would go home. The realization hit me harder than anything else had tonight, sharp and immediate, because it was so simple, so obvious, and I had avoided it entirely because it felt too predictable, too easy for him to expect. But that was the point, was it not? I had been trying to escape him by becoming unpredictable, but everything unpredictable still existed within a range of choices he could calculate. Going back, returning to the place I had left, the place I assumed he would monitor first, felt wrong in a way that might actually be right. My eyes opened. The city looked the same, but something inside me had shifted, not confidence, not safety, but a different kind of resolve, quieter, less reactive. I turned around. No hesitation this time. No second guessing. Just movement in the opposite direction, retracing steps I had already taken, blending into a flow that felt familiar instead of forced. If he was predicting forward, then maybe backward was invisible. I walked 3 blocks, then 4, keeping my pace even, resisting the urge to check behind me, resisting the instinct that kept pulling at my shoulders to look, to confirm, to break again. I reached an intersection and waited for the light to change, standing still among strangers who did not know me, who did not matter, who were not part of whatever this was. The light shifted. I crossed with them, just another person moving through the city. For the first time since I saw him, there was no message. No vibration in my pocket. No sign that he was adjusting, reacting, correcting. The silence stretched longer this time, and I felt it, the absence of his presence pressing against me in a way that almost felt like relief. Almost. I kept walking. 5 blocks. 6. The buildings grew more familiar, the streets more recognizable, the path aligning with something I had known before tonight. My apartment was not far now. A few more turns, a few more minutes, and I could be inside, behind a locked door, back in a space that belonged to me, even if that ownership felt fragile now. I turned the final corner. The building stood exactly where I left it, unchanged, ordinary, nothing about it suggesting that anything had shifted in the world around it. I slowed as I approached, my steps quieter without meaning to be, my focus narrowing to the entrance, to the door, to the small details that felt suddenly important. The handle, the lock, the faint reflection in the glass. I reached for it. That was when I saw it. Not him. Not directly. Just the reflection behind me, faint but unmistakable in the glass of the door. He was already there, standing a few feet back, exactly where I would have stopped if I had walked straight in without thinking. My hand froze inches from the handle, my breath catching in my chest as the truth settled in deeper than before. It was not about forward or backward. It was not about patterns or randomness. I had not returned to a place he expected. I had returned to a place he already owned. You went back, his voice said quietly behind me, calm, measured, like this was simply the next step in something already decided. I did not turn immediately. I could not, because turning meant facing the part of this I had been trying to avoid since the beginning. Slowly, I lowered my hand from the door. The reflection did not change. He did not move closer. He did not need to. I thought. My voice faltered, then steadied. I thought if I stopped trying to escape forward, I could break it. A pause. Then, softer, closer than before. You did, he said. I finally turned, forcing myself to meet his eyes, searching for something. Anything that would give me an answer I could use. Then why are you still here? For the first time, something shifted in his expression, not enough to soften it, but enough to make me feel the weight of what he was about to say before he said it. Because you are not running from a path, he replied, his voice low, certain. You are running from me. and there was nowhere left to go that did not lead back to that. The words settled between us like something final, something that did not need to be repeated to be understood, and for the first time since this started, I did not try to argue with him, because arguing meant I still believed there was a version of this where I could win, and that belief was starting to feel more dangerous than anything else. I held his gaze a second longer, then looked away, not in surrender, not yet, but because I needed space to think, and standing this close to him made thinking harder, like his presence pulled every thought toward him whether I wanted it to or not. The door to my apartment was still right there, inches away, ordinary and unchanged, and I realized how strange it was that something so familiar could feel completely different just because he was standing behind me. I reached for the handle again, slower this time, aware of him, aware of everything, and turned it. The lock clicked open without resistance. Of course it did. Nothing about this night had resisted me. That was the problem. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The dim hallway greeting me with the same quiet it always had, the same faint hum of overhead lights, the same scent of stale air, and something neutral that never quite left. I stopped just inside, not moving further, not turning on the lights, letting the space settle around me like I needed to confirm it was still real. Footsteps followed behind me, unhurried, measured, and the door closed with a soft click that sounded louder than it should have. He did not ask for permission. He did not need to. I turned then, leaning back against the door as if that could create a boundary that did not exist. "You could have stopped me earlier," I said, my voice quieter now, not from fear, but from the weight of everything pressing in at once. At the station, on the street, anywhere. He stood a few feet away, hands relaxed at his sides, his posture as controlled as ever, like this was just another conversation to him, not the unraveling of everything I thought I understood. "I did not need to," he replied simply. That answer should have frustrated me. It should have made me push back, demand something more concrete, something I could use, but instead it settled into the same place everything else had, adding to a pattern I was only just beginning to see. I let out a slow breath, shaking my head slightly. "You wanted me to come back." It was not a question. His silence was enough to confirm it. Something inside me tightened, not panic, not anger, something closer to realization, something that made the entire night shift into a different shape. This was not about stopping me. I continued, more certain now, following the thought as it formed. It was about letting me try. His gaze held mine, steady, and there it was again, that faint shift, that almost invisible acknowledgement that I was finally catching up. "You needed to understand it," he said, and there was something different in his tone this time, not softer, but more direct, like he was no longer speaking around the truth. Not hear it, not be told. My pulse slowed, not because I was calmer, but because something inside me was aligning, pieces falling into place whether I wanted them to or not. I pushed away from the door and walked past him, deeper into the apartment, needing distance even in a space that suddenly felt too small. "Understand what?" I asked, even though part of me already knew. I moved into the living room, the early morning light filtering through the blinds and thin lines across the floor, cutting the space into quiet sections of shadow and light. He followed, stopping just short of where the light touched, staying in the dimmer part of the room like he belonged there more naturally. "That you do not leave because of where you go," he said. "You leave because of what you believe." I turned to face him again, the words settling into something deeper than I expected, something that reached past the fear and the confusion and landed somewhere more uncomfortable. "And what do I believe?" I asked, because I needed to hear it, even if I already felt the answer forming. His eyes did not waver. "That you can exist outside of my reach." The room felt quieter after that, the kind of silence that did not come from absence but from too much being said at once. I let the words sit, turning them over in my mind, testing them, looking for the part that I could reject, the part that did not fit, but every angle I looked from led back to the same point. Tonight had not been about escape. It had been about proving something. To him. To myself. I walked to the window, pulling the blinds aside just enough to look out at the street below, at the same city that had felt endless just hours ago, and now felt smaller, more contained, like it had boundaries I could not see before. "So what happens now?" I said quietly, not turning around this time, because I did not need to see him to know he was still there. The answer came without hesitation. Now you decide what that means. I let out a small, humorless breath, the sound barely there. You make it sound like I still have a choice. A pause. Not long. Just enough to matter. You always did, he said. You just chose within limits you did not see. I closed my eyes for a second, letting that settle in, letting the weight of it press against everything I thought I knew about control, about freedom, about what it meant to leave something behind. When I opened them again, the city looked the same, but I did not. And for the first time since this started, I understood the part that had been missing, the part he had been waiting for me to see. It was not about the path. It was not about the escape. It was about the fact that every version of leaving I had imagined still included him, whether I admitted it or not. The silence after his words did not feel empty. It felt deliberate, like he had said exactly what needed to be said and nothing more, and now the weight of it belonged to me whether I wanted it or not. I kept my eyes on the city for a few seconds longer, watching people move along the sidewalk below, cars stopping at lights, everything following a rhythm that suddenly felt distant from whatever this was. I let the blinds fall back into place and turned slowly, leaning against the window instead of moving closer to him, because distance still mattered to me even if it did not change anything. Then I will choose differently, I said, the words coming out steadier than I expected, because if this was about belief, about limits I had accepted without seeing, then the only way out was to stop accepting them. His gaze sharpened slightly, not in surprise, but in attention, like this was the part he had been waiting for. What does differently look like? He asked, and there was no challenge in his tone, just a quiet expectation that I would answer. I exhaled slowly, thinking through it instead of reacting, because reacting was what had led me here in the first place. It means I stop running from you, I said, and even as the words left my mouth, I felt the shift they created, subtle but real, like stepping onto a different surface. And it means I stop letting you define what leaving is. For the first time, he moved, just a single step closer, not enough to close the distance, but enough to make the space between us feel intentional again. Those are not the same thing, he said. No, I agreed quietly. They are not. The room felt smaller now, not physically, but in the way every movement, every word seemed to carry more weight than before. I pushed off the window and walked past him again, this time toward the hallway that led to my bedroom, not because I needed something from there, but because I needed to move, to keep control of something, even if it was just direction. He did not stop me. He did not follow immediately either, and that pause, that choice to let me move first, felt just as controlled as everything else he had done tonight. I reached the doorway and rested my hand against the frame, grounding myself in something solid, something that had not changed. You said I always had a choice, I continued, not turning around yet. Then I am choosing to stay. The word hung there for a second, heavier than I expected, because it was not surrender, not in the way I would have defined it before, but it was not escape either. It was something else, something in between. I turned then, meeting his eyes again, forcing the meaning to stay clear. Not because I cannot leave, I added, holding his gaze, but because I want to understand what this actually is before I decide anything else. His expression did not soften, but something in it shifted again, that same almost imperceptible change that told me I had stepped into territory that mattered. Understanding requires honesty, he said. From both sides. I nodded once, because that was fair, because if I was asking for answers, I had to be willing to face them, even if I did not like what they revealed. Then start with this, I said, my voice steady despite the tension in my chest. If I walked out that door right now, without planning, without thinking, without trying to be unpredictable, would you stop me? The question settled between us, sharp and direct, leaving no space to deflect or redirect. He did not answer immediately, and this time, the silence felt different, not calculated, not controlled, but considered, like he was choosing his words carefully for a reason I could not fully see yet. No, he said finally. The simplicity of it caught me off guard, not because I expected a different answer, but because of how easily it came. I studied him, searching for the part he was not saying, the part that had to exist beneath that single word. But, I prompted quietly, a faint shift in his posture, almost like acknowledgement. But you would come back, he continued, and there it was again, that certainty, that unshakable belief that made everything feel like it had already been decided. I shook my head slightly, not in denial, but in frustration at how easily he reduced something that felt so complicated to something that sounded inevitable. "You do not know that," I said. "I do," he replied, and there was no arrogance in it, no need to prove it, just a quiet confidence that came from something deeper than assumption. "Because you already did." The words landed harder than I expected, echoing through everything that had happened tonight, every step I had taken, every decision I thought was mine. I looked away first this time, not because I could not hold his gaze, but because I needed a moment to process the truth in that statement, the part of me that recognized it even as I wanted to argue against it. I let out a slow breath, the tension in my shoulders easing just slightly as the realization settled in. This was not about being trapped. It was not about being forced. It was about something I had not wanted to admit, something I had been running from without understanding it. I looked back at him, more grounded now, more aware of the space I stood in. "Then maybe," I said quietly, "this is not about leaving at all." His gaze held mine, steady, waiting. "Maybe it is about deciding whether staying is something I choose." I finished, and for the first time since this started, the choice felt real, not because he gave it to me, but because I could finally see it clearly. The word choice lingered in the air between us, not fragile, not uncertain, but heavy with meaning in a way that made everything else feel quieter, like the moment right before something irreversible settled into place. I watched him closely, not for reaction, but for truth, because that was what this had become now, a search for something real beneath everything controlled, everything calculated. He did not interrupt, did not redirect, and that alone told me more than any answer could have. I stepped fully into the room then, away from the doorway, away from the instinct to keep an exit within reach, and the shift was subtle but undeniable, like crossing a line that only I could see. "If I stay," I said slowly, choosing each word with care, "then it is not because you made it impossible to leave." My voice held steady, even as my pulse reminded me how close everything still was, how easily it could tilt back into something I could not control. "It is because I decide that this is where I need to be." He studied me in silence, his gaze sharp, not judging, not dismissing, but measuring something deeper than the words themselves. "Need?" he repeated, quieter now, like he was testing the weight of it. I did not look away. "Yes," I said, more certain this time, because saying it out loud made it real in a way thinking it never had. Because running did not answer anything. A small pause stretched between us, not uncomfortable, but charged with something that felt different from before, less like opposition and more like alignment that neither of us had fully acknowledged yet. He took another step closer, slow enough that I could see it coming, close enough now that the space between us felt intentional in a new way, not distance, not control, something else I had not defined yet. "And what do you think staying will answer?" he asked. The question was not a challenge, not a test, but it still demanded something honest in return. I exhaled quietly, letting the tension in my shoulders ease just slightly as I considered it, not rushing, not reacting, because this was the part that mattered. "Whether what I felt tonight was real," I said finally, meeting his gaze without hesitation, "or just something you designed for me to feel." The words landed with a weight I could not ignore, because they were the truth I had been circling around since the beginning. Control was one thing, influence was another, and the line between them was where everything changed. His expression did not shift dramatically, but there was something there now, something less distant, less untouchable than before, even if it was still carefully held in place. "You believe I can design that," he said. Not defensive, not denying, just stating it as it was. I held his gaze, not backing down. "I believe you can design everything else," I replied. "So I need to know where that stops." The room felt still around us, the early light outside barely shifting, as if time itself had slowed just enough to hold this moment in place. He did not answer immediately, and this time the silence did not feel like control. It felt like consideration, like he was choosing whether to give me something real or maintain the distance he had held until now. "It stops where you stop letting it define you," he said finally, and there was something in his tone that felt different, not softer, but more direct, like this was not part of a strategy, but something closer to truth. I let that settle, turning it over in my mind, testing it against everything that had happened, every decision, Every step, every moment I thought I had lost control. Then staying is not about you, I said slowly. It is about me. A faint shift in his posture. Almost imperceptible, but enough that I noticed it. It always was, he replied. The simplicity of it caught me off guard again, not because it was unexpected, but because of how clearly it cut through everything else. I moved past him then, not avoiding him, not escaping, just moving with purpose toward the kitchen, needing to ground myself in something ordinary, something that existed outside of whatever this had become. I poured a glass of water, the simple action steadying in a way nothing else had been, the cool weight of the glass in my hand anchoring me to the moment. I took a sip, letting the silence stretch again, but this time it felt different, less like tension and more like space to think, to choose. If I stay, I said again, turning back to face him, more grounded now, more certain of the words I was about to say, then it is not because I cannot leave. I held his gaze, making sure there was no misunderstanding, no room for assumption. It is because I want to see where this leads when I am not trying to escape it. The words settled between us, clear and deliberate, and for the first time, I felt the difference, not in him, not in the space, but in myself. I was no longer reacting. I was no longer running. I was choosing, and whatever came next would not be something designed for me. It would be something I stepped into on my own. The choice did not echo the way I expected it to. It did not create a dramatic shift in the room or in him, but it settled somewhere deeper, somewhere quieter, like a line that had been drawn not between us, but inside me. I watched him carefully, searching for the reaction that would tell me I had stepped into something he controlled, but there was nothing immediate, nothing obvious, just that same steady presence that had followed me through every version of this night. That was when I understood something else. He was not waiting for my decision to act. He was waiting to see if I understood what my decision meant. I set the glass down on the counter, the sound soft but grounding, and leaned against it slightly, letting the silence stretch without rushing to fill it. Then tell me the part you did not control, I said, my voice calm now, not challenging, not defensive, just direct. Tell me where this stops being something you planned. His gaze held mine, unbroken, and for a moment, I thought he might not answer, that he would let the question exist without resolution the way he had let everything else unfold. But then he moved again, another small step forward, closing the space just enough to shift the air between us. You, he said. The word was simple, almost too simple, but it landed with a weight that made everything else pause. I frowned slightly, not rejecting it, but needing more than that, needing clarity in something that had been anything but clear from the beginning. That is not enough, I said. It is the only part that matters, he replied, and there was something different in his tone now, something that did not feel like control or calculation, something closer to certainty without strategy. I crossed my arms, not as a defense, but as a way to hold on to the moment, to keep it from slipping into something I did not understand again. You knew where I would go, how I would think, what I would do, I said, stepping through it piece by piece. You removed every variable except me. A slight tilt of his head, acknowledging the truth in that. Yes. The honesty in it did not feel like victory. It felt like something else entirely, something that stripped away the illusion I had been holding on to. I took a breath, steadying myself again. Then you left the one variable you could not predict. He did not answer right away, and this time the silence was different again, not because he was choosing his words, but because he was letting mine exist, letting me see the shape of them on my own. Not predict, he said finally. Not control. The distinction mattered more than I expected. I felt it immediately, the shift in meaning, the difference between knowing something might happen and having no power to change it. I pushed off the counter and took a step closer, not mirroring him, but meeting him in the space that had slowly disappeared between us. So you did not know if I would come back? I said, testing it, needing to hear it in a way that confirmed what I was starting to understand. His eyes held mine, steady, unwavering. I knew you could, he said. I did not know if you would choose to. The words settled differently than everything else he had said tonight, less like inevitability and more like possibility, and that difference changed something fundamental in the way I saw everything that had happened. Then everything else, I started, letting the thought form as I spoke, was not about trapping me. No, he said quietly. It was about removing everything that was not you. The simplicity of it was almost unsettling, because it reframed the entire night in a way I had not considered, stripping away the idea of control as something imposed and revealing it as something that had been guiding me toward a single point. Choice. Real choice. Not the illusion of it I had been chasing. I let out a slow breath, the tension in my chest easing just enough to think clearly again. You wanted me to see that I was the only thing you could not design, I said, more to myself than to him. But he heard it anyway. Yes. There was no hesitation this time, no pause, no calculation, just agreement. I looked at him then, really looked, past the control, past the certainty, past the presence that had felt overwhelming from the moment I saw him in the station. There was something else there, something that had been hidden beneath everything else, not weaker, not softer, but more honest in a way that made everything more complicated instead of less. And if I had not come back, I asked quietly, because I needed to know, needed to understand the boundary of this as much as the center of it. Another pause, but shorter this time, less guarded. Then you would have left, he said. Not I would have let you go. Not I would have stopped you. Just a statement of fact that carried more weight than either of those could have. I studied him for a second longer, letting that answer settle into place alongside everything else, testing it for cracks, for inconsistency, for anything that would let me dismiss it. There was nothing. Just the quiet realization that for all the control he held over everything else, this part had never belonged to him. I stepped back then, not creating distance out of fear, but out of clarity, because I needed space to feel the full shape of what I had just understood. So this is where it changes, I said slowly, the words forming with a certainty I had not felt before. Not because you decided it should. My gaze stayed on his, steady now, grounded in something real instead of reactive. Because I did. And for the first time since this began, the space between us did not feel like something he owned. It felt like something I chose to stand in. The moment did not feel loud or dramatic. It felt quiet in a way that carried more weight than anything else that had happened, like the world had finally stopped shifting under my feet and settled into something I could stand on without losing balance. I held his gaze, not searching anymore, not questioning, just recognizing the difference between what had been controlled and what had not, and that difference changed everything. The air between us no longer felt like something designed. It felt like something chosen, something that existed because I allowed it to exist. I let out a slow breath, the tension that had followed me since the station easing in a way I had not thought possible, not because the situation had changed, but because I finally understood my place in it. Then we start from there, I said, my voice steady, grounded in a way it had not been before. There was no hesitation in the words, no uncertainty, just a clear line drawn between what had been and what would be. He did not respond immediately, but he did not need to, because the shift had already happened, and we both knew it. Instead, he nodded once, a small movement, controlled as everything about him was, but meaningful in a way that did not need to be emphasized. I turned slightly, moving past him again, but this time it was not to create distance. It was simply movement, natural, unforced, like I was no longer navigating around him but existing alongside him. I walked back toward the window, pulling the blinds open just enough to let more light in, watching as the city continued its morning without interruption, unaware of the quiet change that had taken place inside this apartment. Cars moved. People crossed streets. Life continued, and for the first time since this started, it felt like I was part of it again instead of something separate from it. You said I would come back, I said after a moment, my eyes still on the street below. Not because you would make me, but because I would choose to. I turned my head slightly, just enough to see him in my peripheral vision, not fully facing him, but not avoiding him either. Now I know why. There was a brief pause, then his voice, calm, measured, but carrying something quieter beneath it. And why is that? I let the question settle for a second, not because I needed time to answer, but because I wanted the answer to be clear, not just for him, but for myself. Because leaving was never about distance, I said slowly. It was about clarity. I shifted my gaze fully back to him then, holding it without hesitation, without the weight of uncertainty that had been there before. And I did not have that until now. He studied me in silence, and this time, I did not feel like I was being read, analyzed, or understood before I spoke. I felt like I was being seen, and that difference mattered more than anything else he could have said. Clarity changes things, he said finally. It does, I agreed. It changes what staying means. The words settled between us, simple but complete, and I felt the truth of them in a way that did not need confirmation. Staying was no longer something imposed, no longer something defined by him or by the limits I thought existed. It was something I had chosen with full awareness of what it meant. I stepped closer then, not closing the distance entirely, but enough to feel the presence of him without losing the space that now felt like mine to define. I am not here because I cannot leave, I said, meeting his gaze directly, letting the words carry the full weight of what I had come to understand. I am here because I want to see what happens when I stop trying to. His expression did not change dramatically, but there was that same subtle shift again, that almost imperceptible acknowledgement that I had stepped into. Something real, something that could not be predicted or controlled the way everything else had been. Then you already know the answer, he said. I frowned slightly, not in confusion, but in curiosity. To what? A brief pause. Then, quieter, more certain than anything he had said before. What this becomes. The words lingered, not as a statement, but as something that extended beyond the moment, beyond the room, into something that had not fully taken shape yet. I held his gaze, feeling the weight of that possibility, not as something to fear, but as something to consider, something to step into with the same clarity I had found tonight. I turned back to the window one last time, looking out at the city that no longer felt like something I needed to escape, but something I could move through on my own terms. For the first time, the path ahead did not feel designed or predetermined. It felt open, not because he had